Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome. My name is Ann Ayers. I am the Dean for the Colorado Women's College at the University of Denver. I am also, and importantly in this context, the co-lead for the Community Plus Values Initiative that DU started about a year ago. And we started this initiative because we wanted to find a way to be more connected within our community and create a greater sense of belonging, to find out what was on people's minds, to create programs of value, and to allow them to participate, to allow all of you to participate. And we've turned this online just in the last week or two with good webinars. This one, we had one last week on self-care in a virtual world, and I'll talk at the end about some others that we have coming up. So thank you so much for being here. We thought that this was timely this week because many of us are either getting online and getting used to being online, or we're planning for it next week as Denver Public Schools are on break this week and going back to school next week. And so we thought that that would be a good topic for today. I will finish with this introduction, and then I'm going to ask just one quick question, and then I'm going to pop off of camera and monitor everything that we have going on in the Q&A and also in the chat window. So if you have any questions that you want us to be sure to ask, I will be taking note of all of those, and then about 20 minutes to the hour, I will jump back on and ask those questions. So that will be our process. And so now I'd love to introduce you to our speakers, who I'm so glad on really short notice pulled this off. So thank you so much. I'm amazed at the way DU folks are pulling together here. So Dr. Jeanine Coleman, you can wave. But Dr. Jeanine Coleman is part of Curriculum Studies and Teaching at the Mortgage College of Education. She is the Clinical Associate Professor in the Early Childhood Special Education Program. She has a master's in Early Childhood Special Education and a PhD from the University of Denver in Child, Family, and School Psychology. I also noticed, Jeanine, that you worked with Barbara O'Brien. As I was looking into your bio, I worked for Barbara for a long time too at the Children's Campaign, so we have that in common. And I'm just delighted that you could be here today and share your expertise with us. We have Craig Harrer, who is the director of the Ricks Center for Gifted Children. So that is the elementary and middle school that we run here on the DU campus. And it's a pretty special place. I know my son is on a baseball team. He does not go to Ricks, but he's on a baseball team with several of your students, and they win championships all over the place. So he wanted me to mention that today and tell you you're good at sports too. He grew up in Denver and actually went to TJ, which is not too far from DU, has taught kindergarten briefly, he says, and then grades 2 through 8, doesn't like first graders apparently, in a variety of subjects. I just can't even imagine. I've got a lot of kids of those ages in my house, and that's just amazing. He was the principal of Richel Middle School before helping to open Denver Green School, which is a pre-K through 8 innovation school in DPS that's focused on environmental sustainability. And most recently worked as a high school assistant principal and a school leadership consultant, and then joined Ricks again in February of last year. So we're glad to have you. Dong Din is on our webinar today too. He has become a good friend of mine. He is a student in higher education at the Mortgage College also, and he is a graduate fellow for us on the Community Plus Values Initiative, and will be leading the interview. So that is who we're talking to today. I wanted to just start and say, I woke up this morning and realized that because of the mayor's new order, which I really appreciate all that our public officials are doing, except for the fact that it took away my ability to have our babysitter show up at my house. And for those of you who don't know me, I have 4 children. I have 4 boys at home. And so that was kind of a big blow this morning. And that's kind of where my head is. So this is more important than ever to me. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I thought I would just start by asking Craig, how are you and sort of where are you in all of this? I think it's important for us to just connect on a human level before we dive into some of the big topics. I think you're a little, you might be on mute.
We good?
Yeah.
All right. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Yeah, it was funny. We were talking a little bit earlier before we started here, and I also have 3 boys, 3 teenage boys who you know, we're trying to figure out how to manage the ongoings at Ricks. Ricks went completely online all last week, and so doing that with 3 high school boys has been an adventure. They are all in DPS too, so they're getting ready to. Some of them are doing makeup tests as we speak, but it's just kind of funny. I was trying to negotiate my camera here, make sure that the holes that they had punched in the walls were kind of covered up, and that you know, we were ready to go here. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks.
Yeah. What about you, Jeanine? How's life been going?
Hi. Yeah, thanks for having me do this too. It's been a little stressful, but I don't have young children at home. Our daughter is a senior at DU, so she had just moved out to an apartment with her friends. So actually, there's social distancing right now, but she's just really sad about not being able to finish her spring quarter like she had intended. So.
Hard one to manage. Don, what about you? How are you hanging in?
I'm doing fantastic. The sun is bright and school starts next week and everything's going to be online. So this is the perfect webinar for me to learn from our speakers. But I'm doing fine.
Great. All right. Well, I'm going to pop off and let you all get down to business.
So thank you for coming here today. I do have a couple questions, about 30-40 minutes of questions. So feel free to chime in of who wants to answer them. Yeah, do you want to say anything before we start?
I'm ready.
All right, so the first question here is, how do we explain to kids why all of this is happening?
Craig, you go ahead. You go first.
Oh, okay. Well, I do think there's, you know, and I think my perspective obviously comes from a school administrator at first, in terms of thinking about, we have at Rick Center, we have preschool age children all the way up through 8th grade. And so there's a variety of levels that will, you know, each level may involve a little bit more complexity. And I think when we talk to them, depending on what level it is, we want to give sort of brief explanations that include factual pieces, but also lets kids feel, you know, and understand that they are safe, and that they understand that the parents and the faculty and everyone that they're working with is going to keep them safe. And then it does sort of graduate as you move up. Obviously, as we move up into the upper elementary and middle school, we give kids more agency in terms of discussing with them how they feel, what their opinions are, and sort of connecting them to appropriate sources to do some of the work on their own to understand exactly what's going on. But I think it's crucial for us to give them you know, very credible sources like the CDC or the World Health Organization to base their agency around, and then sort of guide them along the way as we move through this episode.
I think for young children, first we have to remember that parents are a buffer for children that are experiencing stress in these situations. And so we first have to, as parents, calm ourselves and then talk to the children about what is happening. And of course, it depends on the age of the child. The younger the child, we want to match our language to their language. But first, like Craig said, we want to make sure that the children understand and know that they're safe with their families. So we have to help manage our own stress so that we can help manage their stress and anxiety.
Yeah, so you talked a lot about balance, and how do you balance the things that are coming in from the news with the different ages with the children?
Well, for young children, and when I talk about young children, I'm talking about children birth to 8, really. But there's a lot of variability in that age range too. So for what we know about screen time and young children under 2 is that it's really not recommended that they have much screen time at all, because it's not good for their brain development. And so And if you have children in that preschool age years, I would probably have that news off when they're around, because we don't want to add to more anxiety because they're not going to be able to understand what is being said over the news. And even for early school age, I would probably limit the amount of news that's on kind of in the background. Sometimes we have, if the TV is on in the background or the radio is on in the background, children are still paying attention to that, and they know that we as parents are feeling anxious about this situation too, and that they're worrying about it. So we want to limit that kind of stimulation and technology that's on either in the forefront or in the background.
Yeah. And Craig, go ahead. You talked a little bit about more of the older kids. How do you balance what's coming from the news source, and how do you attend to what you're giving to the students or children?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's similar in a lot of ways with what Jeanine just talked about in terms of limiting the amount of exposure, because obviously the older kids have more devices, they have more connectivity, and so it is sort of upon us to as educators to help parents to understand. Let's try to keep some of these interactions through technology limited throughout the day. And one of the big pieces that we've heard over and over, not just from parents but from teachers as well, is that providing some sort of schedule for your students that's pretty regimented in terms of how they interact with their technology has been overwhelmingly successful in terms of keeping their sensitivities to the subject matter within check. And then again, sort of saying that these are some of the resources that we will use when you want to look into information. I think keeping that to a couple, like I said before, the CDC or the World Health Organization helps our students to really frame it, have agency around it, but not spend an inordinate amount of time sort of dwelling on it.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead, Jeanine.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Brian to show slide 2 on the PowerPoint. The next one, please. So this is something that I just wanted to mention, because it is a pretty stressful time about how to manage powerful emotions for children. Can you go back to the last one? So one, we need to think about how we're helping children manage their powerful emotions. And so we need to think about their reaction to the stimuli that's around them. And then how can we help them regulate their behavior? And then how do we help them recover from these really intense situations? And so just like Craig said, developing a routine is really, really impactful, because, and you've been told all this before, especially with very young children, that you are your child's first teacher. And it doesn't mean that you have to all of a sudden be the best teacher or the only teacher around all the time. I know that's very stressful for parents during this time, but if you develop a routine that's really consistent, that allows you to plan these activities and follow the daily routine, then I think that's going to be really helpful. And we can go on and look at some other ones later on. I have some more specific information. I think I have a sample schedule on slide 19. Brian, if you want to show that real quick. And remember, this is for young children. And I think the thing for me is that for young children is that it shouldn't be, as you know, we don't want young children, preschool children, to engage in online learning. That's not best for their brain development. So we want you to take, it's really best to take advantage of these daily routines and intentionally plan activities and playtime to work on your child's development and learning. And so this is a sample of, and you can make any, of course, this is just a sample, so it can vary in many different ways. But I think also this is a really opportune time to work on those daily living skills for very young children. So you're not rushing to get out of the house right now. So you can really take your time and help them work on those skills of getting dressed, doing daily chores, making their bed, organizing their toys, different things like that.
Great. I really like the daily routine that you have here. Gives them a very great sense of timeliness within their day. So when we're transitioning to online learning, Craig, maybe you can answer this. What should we expect in online learning, and what are the different ways school might approach this?
Yeah, so I think, when it comes down to online learning, there's really kind of 4 components, one of which we talked about already, but you want to look for socialization opportunities. And again, I'm talking about a little bit older children, although at Rick's we've begun Zoom meetings, short Zoom meetings with younger children too, to keep them connected and understand, their teachers are still out there, and they get to see their classmates as well. But really it's socialization, communication, and almost a constant flow of communication, then content, and of course the organization or the schedule pieces. So just like Jeanine talked about for younger children, that schedule should also be done for older children to help them organize it. For us at the middle school level, it's been fairly successful to move to a schedule that is very similar to what we do at school. So students are ready and logging in at 8:30 in the morning, and they're starting with their classes. We condense it a little bit, so it provides a little bit more for breaks and for some activities that can be done independently. But I think those are the 4 components you want to see. And then within those 4 components, you want to see social emotional pieces, you want to see academic, obviously, content pieces, and then support pieces. And so our teachers all figure, we did a wheel of for each classroom to address how they would connect and get academic content across to parents. And that wheel could contain, Zoom meetings, FaceTime, packets and projects, and time for social interaction through like a Google Hangout piece. So I think you want to see a variety of ways, not just a posting on, go to this website or get onto a Schoology or a platform and only see an assignment there. You should be able to see interaction in a variety of different ways.
That's great. That's great. Jeanine, do you have anything to add to that?
I was just going to say, I think that having a Zoom meeting or a Google Hangout with young children, with their teacher or with a few of their friends at a time is a good idea if it's limited to, a short amount of time, because we want children to stay connected to their teachers and their peers. And, they might be doing that with other family members too, with their grandparents or aunts and uncles or, so I think that's a really great, great thing to do. If it's done in a limited way. What I worry about is that, especially with a lot of, maybe you have a family has several children in the classroom in the home, and some are older and they're online all the time, and some are younger and they're not being allowed to be online and they want to be allowed online. Having to negotiate who gets, when do kids get to get online? And so I think that's something that parents need to talk about and decide, okay, this is okay for this child, and for this child, this amount of time is okay. And make that clear to all of the children, so that they know what the expectations are and what the limits are. And I think also during this time of stress, it's really important to keep the, like I said, the routine consistent, but also keep your rules the same, keep your limits the same. We don't want, you know, of course you have to relax them however you need to, but kids need limits, and they need to know what the expectations are, especially during times of stress. Oh, you're muted, Craig.
Sorry about
Okay,
that.
great. Sorry, I dropped off for a minute.
Same.
I was going to say to that, just to answer a little bit, we have tried some things at Rick's that I think have been successful, and a couple of them that I think that have helped parents are when we've got siblings. Jeanine, you spoke about siblings. When we have siblings and they're in, let's say, the 2nd and 4th grade, we've opened up those activities to both siblings, and so that's been one way to help parents to you know, minimize some of the bandwidth they're using, but also keep them engaged in interacting and learning at a high level. So that is something that's possible to ask for as well, and we've had a lot of success with that, especially in our enrichment classes where we're doing PE online. We've been doing, you know, Spanish and music online, and that's been an area where I think parents have really enjoyed being able to have both kids at the same place at the same time.
Yeah. So when we're talking about limits and or examining ourselves with our different roles as a parent, as someone who's working at home, how should we know whether to supplement what's coming home? And what if the subject that is being taught, we don't know how to teach him? How do we address that?
You know, as educators, to really close any gaps we may have with parents in terms of our communication. So I feel like if there are additional components, one, you should ask for your school to supply additional resources. I think that all of the educators I've spoken to are in the process of trying to provide enrichment and additional activities. But two, don't be afraid to be in sort of a constant communication with the teachers to say, you know, here's where we're at. I'm having trouble with, or my students is having trouble with linear equations, let's say, and we need some help. And the teachers typically can then in their Zoom meetings run work groups or anything like that, where they can specifically work with either you, the parent and the student, or just the student alone to address some of those issues. But I really do think communication is the key on that. If you feel like you're not, you can't quite remember how to do it or the process by which things should be done.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And one thing I just want to emphasize is that this is a time of stress for everyone. And if parents are stressed, then they're, you know, it's going to be hard for them to teach their children stressful things. And so I would encourage parents to slow down a bit, and we don't have to rush to set up a homeschool right away. I think even some of the public schools are saying, okay, we need to kind of slow down, and you know, yes, they are going to keep on the time, the schedule of the year, but they're allowing for families to take this time to figure out how we do this. And I think we're all figuring out how we do this. Parents are figuring this out, teachers are figuring this out, administrators, and And so I think we have to give everyone a little bit of grace in this huge transition. And then also I would say, in terms of like setting up a schedule or a routine, if you have two parents at home, if you have two parents at home and you have kids at home and both parents are working, setting up a pretty consistent routine for the parents too, to say, okay, at this time of day, I'm going to work and you take care of the kids, and then at another part of the day, the other parent will take over. Because we also acknowledge that a lot of us are working. And so how are we supposed to be working and, engaging our children in all of this online content, or engaging with them personally without this online content? So setting up a schedule and a routine for not only the children, but for the parents is going to, I think, going to be an important first step.
And I would add to that, Jeanine, that, we were able to do it in this past week. We've also did a survey of our parents over the Am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
Is that the sign that I'm talking too much? Is that the subtle cue for that? But just a little bit of, I think, information for parents, and this is obviously a small sample size, but from first grade down, most of, if not all of the academic or online content, parents reported students were not able to access on their own. So there does need to be some time for parents available. Once we got, second grade was around 20%, and then it went up about 20% per grade level until about fifth grade. And then parents felt like students could access that online content 100% of the time and stay engaged in it. So just a piece for parents to sort of think about as they design their schedules, that the amount of interaction you're going to have to do based on the amount of the amount of time that a school is reaching out to your son or daughter or students.
Yeah, so with the transition of online learning, there are some concerns with the potency of having a strong curriculum. What would you say to parents who worry about their children will not learn as much in this environment?
All right, I'll go. I do think there have been concerns, and if you look at some of the research, some of the concerns about online learning have been that students aren't progressing at the same rate that they would in the building. Some of that now has been addressed because previous online learning didn't have the social component that we have now. And so what researchers found, at least in the research that I looked at, was that social connection, group work connection, that was missing. And that was a part of the issue in terms of students progressing at the same rate. Now, that being said, I think other than that component and some self-reflection, when I looked at a meta-analysis of online learning, those two components were the ones that they felt like could adjust for some of the gap. But there's no doubt that there will be some gap just because of the socialization issues. And I think that we're looking at how do we address that gap in a variety of different ways moving forward.
Yeah, I want to backtrack a little bit. Craig, you had some stats about accessing online content. Can you go back to that?
Sure. Yeah. It was basically, and again, we just had surveyed our parents over this past week around how were their students able to access the content that was sent over. Could they do it on their own, or did they need assistance with it? And from first grade and below, our parents said pretty much they've got to be involved at least less than, or they've got to be involved almost 80% to 100% of the time. From second grade, it was about 20% of the time that students could independently access it. Third grade was 40. By fourth grade, it had gone to 80. And then fifth grade through middle school was 100% of the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. So as we find more restrictions for leaving our home increases, what are some good resources to help fill our children's extra time and free time? What are some suggestions or resources for that?
Well, I can talk about the young children, and if Brian, if you could go to slide 4. I've got some developmental educational strategies that you can do at home. And so again, it's taking advantage of the toys and the resources that you have at home, and really helping your child facilitate, you're facilitating that play for your child. So, you know, we always tell parents to talk to their child about what's happening throughout the daily routines. And so, yes, we want you to talk to your child about what's happening, but we also want you to wait and listen. We want to give, especially for children who may have some developmental delays or disabilities, they may need more time to process what you're saying to them. And so talk to them about what you're doing, what you're doing when you're cooking dinner, or when you're changing the laundry, or when you're sitting down to go to work, you know, those types of things. And then pausing and listening. And this strategy of follow the car strategy, it's a very old strategy, but it really just means following. You can do this in play, or you can do this with storybook reading with young children. The first step is to follow their lead in play or in storybook reading. So whatever they're talking about, or whatever they're looking at, or whatever they're, you know, drawn to, comment on what they're doing or what they're playing with. And pause, give a little wait time. And then you can ask some open-ended questions. And so it's not, you know, you can say, if they say, oh, car, I'm playing with, you know, car, you can say, oh, where's the car going? So, and then giving a little bit more wait time. And then if they make a response, then you add a little bit more on to what they're saying. And then again, giving some wait time. And wait time is really important, but it's also really, really hard to do. And so sometimes you might even have to count to yourself up to 10 seconds in between each one of these steps to give that child time to process what you're saying, what you're asking them, and for them to respond. And so you can use this strategy with all sorts of different things, like I said, in their play or in their storybook reading.
I think for older students, you know, there's something that we mentioned a little bit earlier when we talked about their agency for some of the situations going on, is to not be afraid to enter into those conversations with them, tell them how you're feeling, what you're thinking, and explore their thinking. I think another positive piece is to, you know, sort of take an old school approach again with, you know, having them write a letter to someone or to craft something that they would tell, you know, some of our senators or our governor. And so I think that piece is an important component. There's always this, you know, reading with them still is a wonderful strategy, and sitting down and you reading a book and them reading a book of their choice is still a wonderful strategy that parents can employ. And then we also have a list of which we can send out of resources that students can or parents can utilize for a variety of different projects throughout the house while they're at home. And it's sort of broken up into literacy, math, history, and science. And so you can sort of explore those in a variety of different ways, which we can include here.
Yeah, I would say that reading aloud at all ages is really, really helpful. There's like an old book that's called the Read Aloud Handbook. Do you know that book, Craig?
I don't.
It's by Jim Trelease, and it's been around for a very long time and translated into many different languages. But he makes argument that you should read aloud to children starting at a very young age, even up through high school age. And that's something that you can do together. So I think that would be a great thing to do at all ages.
Yeah. Jeanine, I do want to go back to what you said about children with learning differences. What advice do you have for supporting children with learning differences? As parents, we support those kids, but it's not the same as supporting through academic learning. How will we get through this?
Yeah, that is a really, really hard question. And there's been some guidance that's come down from the Office of Special Education Programs that really the learning, the school is still responsible for the child's individualized education plan. And so like what Craig said before, is that it's really about communication with the family. And so what can the teacher, the special education teacher, or other special service providers do to connect with the family so that they can ensure that child with a disability or developmental delays is still receiving the support that they had intended. Now we know that that's not going to be the same as them being in school, and they have a whole team of providers that's working with them. Right now, it's just their parents at home with them, helping them get through the day. So I think, again, we have to give ourselves a little bit of a break and a little bit of grace, and do the best that we can. But it's the communication with the special education teacher and maybe the speech language pathologist or occupational therapist on a regular basis, and doing it's more of kind of a telehealth kind of situation where we're doing this. So I may be the special education teacher, but I'm online with the parent and talking with them about how they can incorporate these strategies within their daily routines and throughout the day. And I'm not necessarily providing intervention online as the teacher to the student. So especially for young children, I think we need to think about, we're not providing online learning for, infants and toddlers and preschoolers. We're actually working with the parents who are then providing that support and that intervention to the children.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So I want to transition a bit and kind of go back to Jeanine. You started to, or you've talked about scheduling quite a bit, and we're going to get some questions about scheduling. So as the schools give us schedules, what I've read online is that the experience with schedules are not an 8-to-3 experience necessarily. There will be breaks, and being at home, there will be some distractions. So what is your advice on scheduling, especially with different ages and different grades of students inside the home?
Well, I think it's going to be a little bit of trial and error at first, so you develop a schedule and you try that out and see if that works. The one thing was that once all parents are starting a new schedule and a new thing. And we know that children might actually have some issue with that. And so they might be resistant to that. And so we have to kind of stay the course on the schedules. And just because we're helping to change behavior of these different kids. And we know that when we put a new behavioral plan in place in any way, that that it's going to kind of get worse before it gets better. And so maybe you put this schedule in place and you have to stay consistent with it for at least a couple of weeks, so that the children can get used to it, and then they can, then hopefully that behavior will decrease. Because some students are going to say, you know what, I'm at home, this is not my time for learning, this is my time to be at home and do whatever I want to do. And so we're asking parents and children to do something that's completely different. So it's going to take some time to change that behavior. So I don't want parents to give up too quickly. We know that when the behavior kind of rises, when it gets worse, that's the time that parents say, oh my gosh, this is not working. So they stop everything and then they start something new again. We have to get over that little hump, so that we actually, when the behavior gets worse, we know that that's probably is what's working. And then, and so really staying consistent with that routine and having those expectations and those limits.
I would say along some of those lines, what we've learned at Rick's over the past week is to be flexible as educators, to also reach out and communicate with parents about sort of what are some of those essential pieces that we want kids doing, and some of the other pieces that we understand could go by the wayside. And utilizing recording tools on Zoom helps a lot, so that parents can then, if the student can't access it at a certain time, they could access the Zoom later. I also want to emphasize sort of lots of feedback for us about just the social part of it, and older kids themselves in our student survey saying, we need some time to just hang out with our friends online. And so we've been creating, lunch. We have online lunch now. We have, a recess where kids are interacting about games and stuff like that. So I do think those are things where you can have multiple levels of kids at. And if you have lunch around the same time, that can be something that, whether you have a preschooler or 7-year-old or 5-year-old, you can sometimes, as long as it's monitored, get them all into those things. So, I know our move forward involves more opportunities for students to just sort of interact with each other without as much structure around it too.
I'm going to jump back in. I wanted to kind of, and Dong, I'm going to ask you to actually stay on or stay close, because we are having this trouble. So if I bounce out, maybe you can pick up the pieces. I don't know. So I want to just throw at you a few questions that have come up in the chat line and also in the Q&A. And I will start with saying, so I do have 4 boys. I have a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, and twin 9-year-olds. It's a busy house. And my 14-year-old, we had a friend, one of the moms, who set up a chat room yesterday and just said, hey, let's, she called it chew and chat. And it was at lunchtime for the boys. And so when I mentioned it to my son, he said, what are we going to talk about? And I said, well, I don't know. But one of the things I noticed was they don't really have, they don't have a good camera game. They, thinking about what do you have to do and be on camera. I saw a lot of the boys kind of, doing this and talking too close. And, but they also, some of them drifted in and out. How do we teach our kids about how to be present online? What should our expectations be? I was stunned at 14 that they weren't doing a better job. I would have expected that of my 9-year-olds, but what are the expectations and how do we teach that? What do you think, Craig?
Yeah, I didn't know if I was going to go first. Yeah, I mean, I think we have found that they don't know what they don't know. And so we had to send out to our families and middle schoolers in particular, what are the explicit expectations online? So, just like anything else, we have to teach that to them. And so there's some good resources out there in terms of saying, where do you position yourself? How do you position yourself? When do we expect feedback? How do we organize, especially using some of the the pieces on Zoom around, you know, raising your hand and offering agreement through you know, just putting a thumbs up on the screen rather than having to talk over everyone else. And so you know, it's just like setting up a classroom and having some rules for your classroom, right? You just, what are your expectations online? And once we did that, I think things went pretty smoothly. But it's simple things like, you know, talk into the camera, you know, stay upright,
Right.
you know, and again, then raise your hand to speak, and put yourself on mute if you have to walk away or anything like that. So, but we could also provide a list of those if parents were interested in online expectations.
If you have that list and would shoot it to me, I can post it on our C+V
Sure.
Places.
I don't think that's only a middle schooler age problem. I think everyone is having that issue.
Oh, yeah.
Whether you're adults or middle schoolers or children.
Yeah, and I think that's key too, just to go a little, you know, there's the academic time and then there's sort of the social emotional time. And when we went online, you know, the dogs we all gave them opportunity to bring the dogs and the pets over, and, you know, let's see your little brothers. And then it became academic time, right? This is academic time, so here's what we expect.
That makes good sense. What do you suggest in terms of helping kids keep a positive attitude about the fact that, Jeanine, you talked a little bit about it's going to be hard for them. Well, maybe it was both of you. You know, when I'm at home, I play. When I'm at school, I go to school. So now I don't feel super happy about the idea that I have to go to school at home. But just keeping a positive attitude, that was what one of our listeners asked.
Well, I think one is that helping them express their emotions and also acknowledging that it's okay that they feel sad or that they feel frustrated or angry about that. And we want them to express those feelings in appropriate ways. So that's okay. You know, we have to acknowledge how we feel, and we have to acknowledge how children feel. Sometimes even if children are older or the younger children have really good language, sometimes they don't have the emotional vocabulary. So they're going to act out how they feel instead of saying, oh, I'm really sad about this. I'm sad I can't play with my friends. I'm sad I got to sit at the computer and do this work. And so acknowledging that and saying that it's okay. And we have to model those expression of emotions for our children too, to say, yeah, this is scary and this is frustrating and I don't like this either. And then we move on. You know, because once we can express that, then we can move on to, okay, now what do we have to do? I think it's unrealistic that we're going to expect children to really say, oh, this is awesome, and we're going to do everything. We have to acknowledge that they're going to have ups and downs just like we do, and to help them manage their stress. And so there's like there's little social stories that we can do, especially for young kids, that we can create. And there's some that I've actually have here in this PowerPoint. One's called Dragon Brain. So Brian, if you can go to slide 12. And this is, even though this was made for younger kids, it's actually great for everyone because it's about deep breathing. And so sometimes we get dragon brain, you know, like we get really mad or because something happens. And so we have to remember to, so there's the beginning of it. Now, if you could go to the next slide, slide 13. So if something makes us mad, we have to remember that we have to smell the flower and blow out the candle. And so it's really about deep breathing, which is what we all do even as adults, you know, so if you do yoga, or if you do meditation, so it's really acknowledging how you're feeling and then calming yourself down. And then go to the next one. And then as soon as, you know, we do that, we acknowledge that, then we can move on and get ready to play. But as parents and older kids, we can do this too. Like, oh my gosh, I have dragon brain. I got to remember to do my flower and candle breathing, and not do it so fast because we don't want anybody to hyperventilate, but really taking the time smelling the flower, blowing out the candle, or something else. And maybe it's blowing up a balloon and then letting it out, or there's lots of different ways we can do that. But giving them some strategies to help them calm down. Because once they do that, then, you know, kids are super resilient and they can change their moods, as you all know, so fast that once they do that, they express that emotion and they calm down, then they're ready to go do something else.
That's great. I want to make sure we get to all the questions, so I may bounce back and forth a little bit between the two of you. So if we have different kids of different ages, there was one of our listeners was saying it as a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. And I know I sent my partner out yesterday to get poster board, and he was like, why? And I said, because I need 4 different ones, and they're all blank. So now you've given me some great resources. But how do you schedule when you have kids of different ages who have different expectations? And how do you kind of keep a family cohesive? And then particularly this listener was asking, and I'm right there with her, how do you do that when you've got 2 full-time working parents in the house managing? Do you have a magic wand?
Well, I think I mentioned earlier that you know, we talked about a daily routine, and you could have a schedule for each child and then have some common things in you know, for the whole family, like dinner time or lunch time or breakfast time, or, you know, reading aloud time or something like that. And then, so every child has their own individual schedule, and it should be a visual schedule. So for younger kids or kids with disabilities, it should be something that they can interact with. Maybe they're, you know, checking something off or something like that. And then if you have 2 parents at home, I think you have to decide between the parents, what part of the day are you taking and what part of the day is the other person taking? And so you have to be able to split that up based off and it might change. It might change day to day depending on your work. And so that's something, maybe you have a family meeting every night to say, okay, this is what tomorrow looks like. And so I think the more information that you can share with each other and with the children to prepare them about what's going to happen every day, then it's going to be better then it decreases the anxiety. The anxiety goes up when it's the unknown. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know, you know, and then your anxiety just kind of goes through the roof. And so by making a plan, sticking to it, communicating, is really, these are really easy
Right.
things to say, but not necessarily easy things to do.
Craig, you must have some families that have multiple kids. What are you seeing?
Yeah. Well, I think number one, the communication and letting the teachers know that you have these, you know, I have 3 at home, and so here's what we're going to do. And then condensing pieces for them that you should expect that your teachers are willing to condense some pieces for them. So we can go online at this point in time because it's going to work best for all of our families, and we can Zoom at this time. The other strategy that has worked well, and it's not necessarily for a 7 and a 3-year-old, but a 7 and a 5-year-old may be able to, let's say it's I mentioned this earlier, an online Zoom meeting for music, and they're singing about Over the Rainbow. Well, the 5-year-old and maybe even the 3-year-old can still partake in that. And so allowing them and encouraging teachers to allow them whenever possible to be a part of it. But I do think we have one in particular family at our school that has 3 students in different grade levels. And I wanted to give parents the okay, and I think overwhelmingly schools give you the okay to sort of make that decision, what you can do sustainably and what you're going to have to step out of, and then just inform us as to what's going on, how we can increase the effectiveness within the time frame that you have allotted. And then the other part is, depending on what the students are working on and the connectivity, just again, communicating with the teachers about how they could send out resources or projects that all of them could work on. So although there may be different concepts that we're looking for from the 7-year-old and the 5-year-old and the 3-year-old, there's still projects and pieces that they could all do. And then when we get a chance to chat with them or assess them in a variety of different ways, we'll assess them at different levels. So even from just making them working together to make a paper airplane, and then talking about how those airplanes fly and what they do at different levels, teachers can adjust around the project that's then sent out.
Those are great. I want to be really respectful of people's times. And Brian, I know we have a final slide that we can put up that has an email address for you. There are a few questions that we're not going to have time to get to. One is about specifically, are there resources for gifted and talented kids that you would suggest, Craig, that might be helpful? So if we can get you to email us, we can, and let us know who you are, we can actually filter those questions over to the panelists, and I'm going to ask you if you would answer those. That would be really great. You've given a lot of your time to DU and to our community, and I'm so grateful, and just on such short notice. So I continue to be thrilled to be part of DU and to see some of the magic that's going on our campus. So I want to thank you. I also want to just say one of the questions that came through was about equity and how are schools helping one another, and it's a good lead into the fact that we're going to have another webinar on Thursday. And at that webinar, we are going to have Dr. Amanda Moore McBride, who's the Dean of the Graduate School for Social Work, along with Christine Bonero, who is the CEO and president of Mile High United Way. And so they will talk a lot about some of those issues around equity and how we can help in our community those who need it most, and how do we do that when we have to be remote. And I don't know if either of you have had any time to be with either of them, or if any of you have, but they are really, really substantially, they're substantial leaders in their communities, and regarded very much as experts across the nation. So I think that will be really exciting. But anyway, thank you so much. We're right at 12 o'clock and we're going to sign off. Brian, I don't know if you can push that slide. There it is. So if you email us at communityplusvalues@du.edu, we will make sure that your questions that we haven't been able to answer get answered. So Craig and Jeanine and Dawn, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.